Good evening, everybody, and welcome. My name is Sophia, and I run events here at the Strand. Before we launch into a discussion of Tracy Clark-Flory's book, Want Me, I'd like to share a little bit of history about the Strand. The Strand was founded in 1927 by Benjamin Bass on 4th Avenue's Book Row. Stretching from Union Square to Astor Place, Book Row gradually dwindled from 48 bookstores until, after 93 years, the Strand is the sole survivor, now run by third-generation owner Nancy Bass-Wyden. We want to thank all of you for your support. Without our loyal community of book lovers and authors, we wouldn't be here today. Tonight, we are thrilled to have with us Tracy Clark-Flory for the launch of Tracy's book, Want Me. Tracy Clark-Flory is a senior staff writer at Jezebel. Her work has been published in Cosmopolitan, Elle, Esquire, Marie Claire, Salon, The Guardian, Women's Health, and the yearly Best Sex Writing Anthology. Prior to Jezebel, she was a senior staff writer at Salon. She has appeared on 2020, MSNBC, and NPR. Tracy lives in San Francisco with her family. Joining Tracy in conversation is Sarah Hepola. Sarah Hepola is the author of the New York Times bestseller Blackout and the upcoming Unattached. Her work has appeared in the New York Times Magazine, The Guardian, Bloomberg Business Week, Salon, Elle, Glamour, and Texas Monthly. So, without further ado, please welcome Tracy Clark-Flory and Sarah Hepola to the stage.
Okay, so you wrote a book, and I've been thinking about when you first started thinking about writing a book, and you would call me, and we would have these long conversations about how do you start a book and where does a book begin. And I feel like this is so common. I think a lot of young writers, they want to write a book. They might even know the topic of the book that they want to write, but like, how do you start? What do you start? What do you do? Can you talk a little bit about how this book began for you?
Yes. Yeah. So the book began, I thought it was a book about straight men's desire. I did not think it was a memoir. I thought it was a book about men, which is just really poetically perfect because it ended up being a book about me and my own desire, obviously. So it was that sort of backwards, route to myself that the book talks about, where I really thought it was this one thing. I thought it was, that I would zoom in on my interest in that subject, right? But then the more I did that, I started to think about, like, why am I writing about this? What does this mean to me? And then suddenly I was writing about myself. So, but really the process only began because I had, the curse/blessing of being laid off when I was extremely pregnant and not knowing what I was going to do and who was going to hire me in my state. And so kind of finally feeling like here was my opportunity to try to do a proposal, because I wanted to write a version of this book for maybe a decade. And obviously, the idea has shifted and changed a lot over that time, but it's been something that's been brewing for a very long time.
Can we go back to why straight men's desire? Why that?
Because it was the topic that I was trying to master, I think, for so long. I mean, really, even going back into 12-year-old in the cybersex chat rooms, back in the AOL days. I wanted to make sense of it. I wanted to understand it. I wanted a sense of mastery over it. And that was a thread that carried through my personal life. And then obviously also into my professional life, where it's been not the sole focus, but it's been a driving focus for me of, in some ways, wanting to just make sense of, the parts of maybe the sort of cliche of straight men's desire that sort of scared me, threatened me, that I felt I didn't live up to. And so one way of confronting that is to sort of make sense of it and understand it.
You mentioned being 12 years old and being on cyber chat. So that will tilt you towards what I'm about to ask you about. But I wanted to say that when we were first talking about your book, and a lot of people have good stories and a lot of people want to write memoirs, but I wasn't sure that you had a memoir, not because I don't think you can't write one, because they're hard to make, until you told me the story of yourself cyber chatting and also finding your dad's porn. And I think I read the pages that were you finding your dad's porn, and that's when I was like, oh, this is a book.
That's interesting. Yeah.
So can you tell us that story tonight?
About finding my dad's porn or the cyber sex?
maybe you could bring them together into one sort of story about
all right,
like this developing, this is your like coming of age story.
Yeah. I mean, the cyber sex, like I want to say it was like 96, 97. I was like 12, 13. And it was, the way that I framed it in my head was very much like, okay, I want to find out more about sex. And I like in general was interested in sex and understanding more about this adult topic, but also specifically kind of wanted to engage with boys and men about it and to try to understand what they wanted. That was sort of the frame for me, which I think in a lot of ways was a cover story. Like it was a way of not owning my own curiosity and, my own interest in the topic. It was, I was doing what girls are supposed to do, which is sort of work at making themselves desirable. And so like some girls were reading Cosmopolitan and like looking at like hot sex tips, and I was like having cyber sex. And that was just sort of like my approach to sort of, preparing myself, studying up. But I grew up in Berkeley, California with hippie parents and a dad who was, pretty outspokenly feminist and was often talking about how, what makes a woman most attractive is her brain and, that kind of thing. And my dad's sort of messaging around like sexual values, around like what it means to be a woman, were often in total contrast to the sort of messages that I was getting in cyber sex chat rooms, on, MTV, in the world at large. And so I kind of like held out this hope that there were men out there like my dad, like who really like felt that a woman's most attractive feature was her brain. Like that sounded great. I wanted that. And then a couple years after the cyber sex years, I discovered my dad's porn, his perfect10.com subscription, which like, perfect 10, literally rating women on a 1 to 10 scale of attractiveness. And then comparing that to a woman's most attractive feature is her brain, found a little bit hard to reconcile. Right. And so it sort of, for me, it was a moment of sort of, it felt like a moment of disillusionment at that time, because I'd been sort of confronting like all of the sexual messaging in our culture at large, and felt threatened by them and interested in them, but was holding out hope for this sort of other idealistic realm. And that moment really felt like a bursting of that fantasy. So I think that really was, an important moment in terms of just pushing me forward on this journey to try to understand straight men's desire, but also to sort of understand the place of fantasy in our lives, and to try to reconcile, like, to try to reconcile what seemed like a contradiction that I saw in my dad.
I assume that the Perfect 10 magazine did not have a series of brain scans.
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't think that the Perfect 10 was referencing, IQ or whatever. Like, it was obviously, that was not the focus of the magazine. And so it's, you know, yeah, it felt, you know, it felt a little bit like, not to be too dramatic about it, but it felt like a betrayal. Like I experienced it as a betrayal because it felt like I'd been told a lie. It felt like he'd been concealing a truth from me.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's one of the very deep things about, but I mean, I always felt that way when like my mother would tell me like, oh, you're so beautiful, you're so perfect. But then I wasn't getting any attention at school, you know, so you felt like, oh, my parents are lying.
Right.
They're telling me lies. This is propaganda.
Well, that's how I felt about like what they said about sex, which like I was lucky to grow up in a household where we talked about sex at all. And like where it was talked about in a very positive way, where like my dad was telling me that sex was like two star systems colliding in outer space. And so it's very positive messaging, but you know, like that was an overly simplistic sort of representation where like I got a very sort of like sex is only about love and like in the context of, you know, sort of monogamy and marriage. And like it was not the reality of like how my parents actually thought about sex. And so it was this very sort of, you know, it was a censored version of it. And it was one that, you know, clearly if I just looked around, I knew that it was not as simple as that. So yeah, I felt like I was being lied to.
Your book brought up for me the question of, is there any really right way to tell a kid about sex? Or is it by its nature disillusioning, slightly awful, violent, terrible? Is there just like every culture and every generation is going to try to find ways to like sell it to kids or explain it to kids later, but it's just one of like life's necessary heartbreaks in some way.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's inevitable heartbreak and disillusionment. And then I think it's also like, I just think that with more conversation, like ongoingly, that actually that takes a little bit more, that has more faith in like a young person's sort of savvy, because like, you know, I understood, like I didn't buy what my parents were telling me. You know, I was observant. I could see the world around me. Like, I think that for parents to approach their kids with like, you know, sort of respect for their ability to kind of hold the complexity of it. Right. And I think there will be disillusionment and disappointment, and that's totally inevitable. But like, I mean, talk about the disillusionment and disappointment. Like that's a really good starting point, you know, to sort of allow for more complexity in those conversations. But I think that, you know, it often feels so scary for people to talk to kids about sex. And so, you know, you kind of like just give the message that you really want them to get. You know, it's often driven by some set of morals, you know, in my dad's case, the sort of like sex is good, it's great, but then don't allow for that bigger, more complex picture.
I wanted to go back to the cyber chatting and your sort of sexual awakening there online. You know, that part of the story is fascinating to me because I was old enough to remember like I'm probably a little less than 10 years older than you. So I remember 2020 episodes and like 60-minute episodes that were like, your kid could be cyber chatting right now.
Yeah.
Hell out of parents. And they're warped. They're going to be warped. They're going to be messed up. And so when I read your account, it was like, oh, the cyber chat kids are talking back to us now. Like they're telling us what. And so my question for you is, do you feel warped by that? Do you feel like that, I mean, not hopelessly warped, but do you feel like that was dangerous?
I don't feel warped by the cyber chat, like, because like when I think about my experience in those chat rooms, I think I encountered a lot of information that was just too much information with zero context. And so I think that there were a lot of ways in which that was just like confusing and overwhelming and also intriguing. And so it did speak to a curiosity about sex and that I had. And so I don't think that I was warped by it, but I think if I like zoom out and it's like the sort of broader picture of like inputs around that time, I think that there would be other ones that felt more warping, because I think like the thing about cybersex was that like there was a safety and anonymity and sort of distance and the ability to totally click out of a chat room. And it felt like like it felt like akin to like making prank calls. Like it was, and so it didn't feel like, if it ever felt like too much, I could just tap out. Whereas like, you know, I think like MTV, I honestly wonder about the like sort of permanent impact on me of MTV Spring Break specials.
Good, everybody. What? That is like thinking the DSM-5.
Yeah.
Some sort of derangement syndrome.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Like that's more like, if I was going to point the finger, I would probably point the finger at MTV Spring Break specials and like wet t-shirt contests. And, you know, that's kind of messed me up, I think.
Yeah. Cause I was like 22. I'm like this, you know, binge drinking college kid watching that, like in my sweats going like, who wears this? But you are like 14 and 15.
Yeah.
And probably feeling like that's how I should act. That's your blueprint for how to behave as a teenager.
Definitely. Yeah. It's something really, truly like, this is something to aspire to. Like, this is adult life. This is what I have to look forward to. This is what's sexy, you know, and it was very intriguing. And like, you know, you want to talk about like the title of the book, Want Me, like the display of women being up on stage and, you know, wet t-shirt contests and that sort of thing. Like that is very much like Want Me performing, you know, for men.
I just want to say that, so we're going to be taking questions from the audience so they can ask you things we'll start at about 8:10 Eastern time. So basically in 20 minutes. And I just want to mention that if you want to, I think there's a chat function and you want to just drop your questions in there. If not, I'll just keep firing them off. There was something else that went on in your teen years that I want to hit on. We have something in common. We have many things in common, but one thing we have in common is that we were absolutely crushed out on Hollywood heartthrobs. You had great taste and chose one Leonardo DiCaprio.
Yeah.
That's about. 2 questions. Why Leo? And what do you think was going on there?
Yes. I mean, I think the why Leo is totally it's the sensitive bad boy thing. It's the sort of, the troubled poet, you know? Yeah. I mean, that's hard to get over. Yeah. That one lingers, for sure. Yeah. I mean, it was like, I think another interesting thing though, like if I really think about what attracted me to Leo and in those years was that he was always playing these tortured like artist types. And he was always having these like big expressive moments where he was like screaming at the sky with balled fists and like really like so like, and it was crying and it was like, you know, just like so emotional and big. And I really think that there was some element of like, you know, Leo was able to sort of express the big emotions that I felt inside, you know, that sort of pubescent turmoil, but didn't really feel that I could express. And so I sort of like channeled some of that through his very dramatic characters. So I think it's a combo, but I think it's that sort of like a masculinity that's sensitive, that's a little bit tortured. I think that's what drew me in.
Yeah, as well it should.
Who was yours though?
Well, River Phoenix.
Yeah, very similar, right?
Very similar, and followed by Johnny Depp.
Yeah.
So I just had this like total sweet tooth for beautiful, I would say pretty,
yeah,
tortured artists that are misunderstood.
Yeah.
Which has been an interesting dating
life. Right. Yeah. Keeps things interesting. Mm-hmm.
Boy, does it ever. On the screen, kids. I'll try to bring that into your life. But I will say that I was obsessed with Leo in Titanic. Absolutely.
You were.
Oh yeah, I was like 25 years old, and I was like, oh, I thought he was just beautiful.
I abandoned Leo when Titanic came out because he was too big. He was over.
There's like the indie band. You're like,
yeah. And I was a real fan, so I was one of the originals. Yeah. And then I moved on.
Gilbert Grape type Leonardo.
I watched that movie many a time, but it was only Romeo and Juliet. It was like a very hot and intense fandom that lasted for like a year and a half or something. But I like really made a lot of that year and a half.
Gosh, great in Romeo and Juliet.
I just watched it a couple weeks ago. It holds up.
It's a great movie. And what do you think of him now?
Oh, well, I mean, I'm not a fan.
I hope he's not on.
I know. Sorry, Leo. I'm not a fan of his. And I also like the whole, I mean, I think it was really interesting, like being a fan of his in the 90s when he was also at the same time, like rumored to have this wild private life, like womanizing sort of life where he was part of the Pussy Posse in Hollywood, as they were called, the sort of like modelizer thing. And as a teenager, I had these sort of like mental and emotional gymnastics that I did to kind of make that be okay. And hold on to like the romantic character on screen. But I think I have a harder time with that now. So, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you really came of age with coarse, like in your face sexuality. Like even the phrase pussy posse, casually used to describe the biggest star of the age.
Right.
It's quite surprising. I mean, and you write in the book about, you talk about like Oprah teaching strip, like pole dancing. I'd forgotten all of that. Like, I mean, it was a really intense time. You have an interesting relationship with porn. It's different than mine. Can you talk a little bit about what that's been and what you think of porn now?
Yeah. It's complex because, I mean, I think on the one hand, like as a young person, I really approached porn as a sort of guidebook where I thought like, I interpreted it very literally. Like, okay, this is what men especially are watching. It's what they're fantasizing about. Therefore, this must be what they actually want. And so like, this is the ultimate fantasy, and that ultimate fantasy, men must obviously want to realize that. And so, I really, and I've actually learned now that that's common for girls. There have been studies that show that girls very commonly describe their relationship to porn as like that they're doing research and that they're studying. And I think that can be both the sort of wanting to be wanted thing and the sort of like normalizing girls making themselves desirable to boys. But I think it's also the cover story aspect where it's more acceptable to be watching it to sort of get better in bed than it is to be watching it for your own enjoyment. But yeah, I mean, I think I think I sort of misinterpreted porn and in a lot of ways, and sort of tried to live up to that fantasy that I saw on screen in a lot of ways that as that played out in my actual sex life was not satisfying for me. On the other hand, porn was this really important part of my sort of getting to explore and understand my own mind and my own body in a way that I really can't discount. I think that like the sort of cover story of exploring men's desire, it was my way into sort of exploring my own, right? Like I was there to study up, and then I was there because I wanted to be and because I was getting something from it. And this sort of route of discovery there, I mean, that was that was huge to me, because I think for a long time in my 20s, like I couldn't articulate what I wanted in sex with a partner, but it was with porn that I was like, on my own, able to sort of explore my sexuality in a way that was really meaningful. So it's like this, there's this tension there where there is this sort of, aspirational performative aspect. And then there's this other sort of exploratory, kind of place of discovery.
I mean, one thing that some of your writing over the years has taught me about is that porn, like when they do studies on porn search terms and stuff like that, the variety of what people are interested in is incredibly diverse.
Yeah.
Like, porn gets a rap for being like everybody looks the same and there's a porn body, quote unquote. But actually what it's done is shown just how incredibly different and manifold and like the sexual appetite is.
Yeah. Oh, totally. And so I felt that in terms of like, my own body, like, and also in terms of my own desires to explore, like, there's a lot of negative things to be said about tube sites, but exploring tube sites in my early 20s, like that was where I sort of came across that huge rainbow array of interests and genres and stuff, that like where it becomes really apparent that sex is not as simple as my parents had told me and as they told me in class, like that there is this whole wider world of sex that and so that, to me, like being exposed to that variety and possibility and, the potential to sort of have that normalized is huge.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You read about wanting to have sex like a man.
Mm-hmm.
What does that mean to you?
At the time, I think it meant, being able to pursue sex casually with someone that I was attracted to, and to feel satisfied by that. I think I also had this, like, I wanted to feel like I could, like, and I also kind of wanted to prove that I could, that I wanted this sort of access to exploration that I felt like men had. And so, but I think I was also working with a real sort of cliche and stereotype of men's desire for a very long time. And so, I think in a lot of ways, like I was competing against that cliche of what men want. Yeah.
Do you think that men do like casual sex with multiple partners? Like, do you think that's fulfilling for them?
Yeah, I think it can be. I think that it can be fulfilling for men, and I think it can be fulfilling for women. I think it can be fulfilling for all people. I think that my experience of it was, it was thrilling at times. It was satisfying at times, but I was coming from a place at that time of, really, I was just very narrow in terms of this sort of satisfaction that I was trying to gain from sex. And at that time, it was a sense of power through being desired, through being wanted, through being, sexy. And so, that was thrilling. And then at a certain point, I think the sort of thrill and satisfaction that I got from it started to feel way too narrow. And, that I realized that I wanted a lot more than that, that I was not just interested in that sort of thrill. And so, yeah, I think it's absolutely possible, but I think that it's also, I think I was engaging in casual sex a lot at that time, and sometimes wanting more, wanting more commitment, wanting more intimacy, but sort of tamping down my own wants and kind of performing to this, what I expected my partners wanted, which, I don't think necessarily was accurate either.
When did sex start to turn for you? Like, when did you start to realize that this pursuit might be not giving you what you want.
Yeah. I mean, I think honestly, I think it started to turn, after my mom was diagnosed with terminal cancer. And I went through a pretty difficult time after that, where I was pursuing really sort of rough and punishing sex as a way to cope with that, to sort of, surface the all pervasive emotional pain that I was experiencing. And there was this way in which like my grief kind of fused with this like ongoing project of like mastering, straight men's desire and confronting it, this sort of like adversarial, like I can take it kind of attitude. And I got at a certain point, I think that I just kind of followed that road as far as I could, and I actually kind of scared myself a couple times. And I think that was where, I started to feel like I wanted to go back towards the light. Like it was where I was not wanting to sort of punish myself anymore, and that I was starting to open up a little bit to the possibility of being vulnerable.
I want to remind people about the Q&A chat if they have questions. Otherwise, I'll keep going because I have millions of them. She and I will talk for hours.
We have.
Yeah. You write that Pornhub said one of the most searched for terms was rough sex. And you write about rough sex in the context of your grief. Obviously, you just told us about that, but that's not true for everyone that's searching for that term. What do you think is going on there?
Yeah, I mean, I think for a lot of people, rough sex or, BDSM is, that is a concrete sort of enduring identity for them. And then I think it's also the case that, people can sort of have moments in their life where that's something that they're interested in, and that can shift, over the course of a lifetime, right? Like to me, that's one of the amazing things about sex is that it can kind of meet you wherever you are in your life, that like, your interests can change, the sex you're having can change depending on where you are and what you need. And, in my 20s, I was seeking this thrill from casual sex and being wanted. And, in some ways for a time that felt satisfying. And then, in my 30s, I wanted something very different from that. And it could change again. I expect it probably will, So, but yeah, in terms of rough sex, I mean, there has obviously been greater visibility of, BDSM and, so I think, and actually there was just a study that came out that found Debbie Herbenek at Indiana University, and I can't cite the statistic, but I think it was something like 80% of people had reported experimenting with it. So to me, it's about, power dynamics, and that's, the idea of experimenting with power dynamics and sex is, age old, and maybe people are stumbling across the idea or getting a sense that it's, feeling like it's more acceptable, things like 50 Shades of Grey, that they can sort of, experiment with it. Yeah.
Got married eventually.
I did eventually.
What has marriage taught you about sex?
What has marriage taught me about sex? I mean, one thing I would say is that it's like what I was saying about, sex sort of shifting over the course of a lifetime. Like, that the sex you're having isn't necessarily going to like stay the same, and that, you don't sort of, that you can, I don't know how to say this in a way that's not corny, but
I love corny.
Okay, I'm going to be corny, but that you can even after years of marriage, that you can sort of discover yourself and your partner in new ways, that you're not sort of arriving at like, okay, here we are, and this is the sex we have, and this is how it goes. And, we know each other, and, that's that, that it can continue to kind of shift and change, which to me is great news.
Tracy, I think that's beautiful. And I think one of the things that MTV Spring Break, or I don't know what it was, did to your generation was to think that that's corny.
Yeah.
And that's not corny at all. That's unbelievable. That's a universe in another human.
Yeah. 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 So I guess that's what I found. I mean, what I found in marriage basically, and it's like, there are ways in which I hate this. I hate the narrative, right? But this is how this has played out for me, is that within the context of this, committed relationship, I have found this sense of safety and intimacy to, explore sex in a way that feels meaningful to me, and is, where there are those surprises. And yeah, I mean, that's the sad thing to me, is that like we are sold such a lie about what's sexy, like that some of the most satisfying sort of moments I've had, or the moments even where I've felt sexiest, have been like almost precisely at those points when I'm supposed to feel the least sexy and be having like the worst sex of my life. Yeah.
Yeah. We've got all these questions filling up the Q&A, and I want to get to them, but I have to come back and ask you, why do you say you hate the narrative? What did you mean? You hate the narrative of getting married at the end or something like that?
Yeah, I hate the narrative. Like, I mean, I think the thing I struggle with is the sort of narrative of like, I'll cite, I think this was on a men's rights blog or something. Someone like read a personal essay that I'd written about getting married, and they titled it "From Hoe to Housewife." And so it's
yeah, that's how I think of you.
Right. Yeah. If anyone asks you, that's what comes to mind. So, I hate this sort of like idea of like, she explored around and then she settled down. But then I also hate the narrative of like, she found her Prince Charming and, has ridden off into the sunset.
Yeah, I know. But you found a partnership with a loving man, which feels to me like a great ending. And I think there's a little bit of
it is, yeah.
Like, I worry that, I'm a single person, I'm hoe to hoe, never made the transition. But, I worry that there's this, people feel like it's uncool to get married or something like that. And it's beautiful to find a partner.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I guess like, I think partnership is beautiful. I have my issues with marriage where I'm occasionally like, why did I get married? Do I really believe in this institution? But yeah, I think relationships are beautiful. I think I agree on that.
Okay, sure. Good. That's what I want to pursue. I don't have really that much.
Intimacy is great. Commitment is cool. Yeah. Marriage, but yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So we've got some questions here. Victoria Savannah, whose name that I like. Do you feel like mainstream culture has changed for the better in regard to sex since you were younger?
I mean, I think that there have been a lot of really positive changes just in terms of like the conversations that we're having now about sexuality and gender. To me, like that's opening up a space for people to, feel more accepted and, to feel like they can explore, and like all of that is the sort of conversations that are happening, I think are, have moved in a very good direction. Culturally, for me, my main thing is how we're stuck in this like neoliberal feminist moment, which is all about sort of putting the emphasis on personal empowerment and self-improvement. And, you know, it's been very commercialized. And so sexual empowerment, the idea of sexual empowerment has really been sort of twisted and warped into this like individual pursuit. And so to me, like in terms of like broader cultural themes, like that's one that has been pretty consistent for like the last, I mean, since the 90s. And I think has only sort of gotten more intense. So to me, that is a negative development.
Linda asks, have you had desires that have scared you or made you uncomfortable, and how have you processed them?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I think like when I was first sort of exploring porn, or like, you know, I was exploring men, and then I was like finding myself interested in porn, I think I was really shocked to find the things that I was interested in and the sort of possibilities of where my own mind could go, where I approached that it as like, you know, I'm exploring these perverts, these perverted men, and, you know, I have no part of that. And then to discover my own sort of potential to go there, I think was really scary. And then I've gotten over that. But yeah, I think once I sort of understood the meaning of fantasy, that fantasies don't have to be interpreted literally, that they often can sort of have the opposite meaning that they seem to have. You know, that fantasies often are sort of elaborately constructed to kind of give us a sense of safety in being sexual. You know, then I think like that to me was a major shift where, you know, fantasies don't scare me. They're just fascinating now.
Danielle Hidalgo has a question, and it's a little bit long, so I'm going to read it to you. That wasn't a critique. That was a preparation. I just wanted to let you know, the audience know. Okay. I've been thinking a lot about Jane Ward's new book, The Tragedy of Heterosexuality, during your talk. In it, she explores what she calls deep heterosexuality. Using insights from lesbian feminism, she encourages straight men to seriously explore the human capacity to desire, to fuck, and to be feminist comrades with women partners. As I read her work with my students, they wanted to talk about what this might look like in terms of sex. What do you think it might be?
Sorry, can you repeat the I think there was a quote in there one more time, just the latter part of that.
Yeah, so she encourages straight men to seriously explore, quote, the human capacity to desire, to fuck, and to be feminist comrades with women partners.
To encourage straight men, yeah. To desire, to fuck, and to be feminist comrades. Yeah, I mean, to that, I will say that I think oftentimes men approaching feminism, they can sort of misconstrue it or misunderstand it. And definitely sort of, I'll just talk about my husband. I'll just throw him under the bus. Sorry to him. But, you know, he, like, while I was trying to sort of master straight men's desire, like he was on this sort of parallel track of like being a feminist guy who, you know, didn't want to be this sort of stereotypical, he once said, tin-eared, jackhammering brute. And so he like sort of went hard on this sort of feminist studies and read the big lesbian sex book in this attempt to be a non-heteronormative lover. And, you know, I think a lot of that was definitely pointed him in the right direction, but I think there were other ways in which he swung a little bit far, where he felt like he couldn't really own his desires and was sort of afraid of, you know, he was afraid of that sort of cliche of straight male sexuality. And so I think there's a real sort of balancing act there, and sort of tweaking of the dials in order to arrive at a happy, healthy place.
Jimmy Carr asks, what are some of the most interesting sex beats you've covered that also we'll just ask you to do one. Ask us to tell one.
Yeah. I mean, the orgasmic meditation retreat was fascinating because, I found myself at that time I was struggling with faking orgasms. And so here was this woman with this sort of, literal manifesto around, women getting in touch with their own desire. And, it seems so bizarre and over the top, the idea that basically a woman would lie down without any clothing on from the waist down, and that she would have her clitoris stroked in a very particular way for, as a timer counted down from 10 minutes or something. And what was most amazing about that experience was just witnessing the women in the audience who are watching this demonstration take place, where, several women were crying, weeping, where they were so sort of touched to see this display of a woman sort of receiving pleasure in this very targeted and directed way. It then came out years later that that organization, One Taste, is accused of abuse and exploitation, and it took a very dark turn. But what I saw in that room of women who were sort of seeking answers and wishful of just something more, that they were there because they had sex lives that were unsatisfying, and that they were so desperate to pay, hundreds of $500,000 for a weekend retreat to sort of get in touch with their own bodies.
I have a quick question for you. I would like to know how motherhood changed your relationship with your body.
Hugely. I mean, that was one of those moments where, saying when I was at my least sexy, ostensibly, I felt my sexiest, because I think, after giving birth, I felt powerful. I'd really survived something, and was amazed at what I was capable of doing, what my body was capable of doing. And it put me back down into my body in this real way. And also there are all these roiling hormones and all of that, but really it just put me in my body, and my body was not conforming to the sort of mainstream ideals. And yet I felt sexy and sexual. And, so I think that motherhood has been a really sort of crossing over the threshold into, I don't want to say irrelevance, but there is this sort of move into motherhood where you feel you're of lesser cultural importance, and there's this kind of freedom in that. It feels really freeing to kind of let go of some of the trappings from before. But just physically, this sort of return to my body was huge.
I'm so glad you made motherhood part of this memoir. I feel like people have this separation in their minds. There's the sex memoir and there's the motherhood memoir. It's very much a part of the false divide we make in our society. That these people are sexual and these people are not sexual. And the truth is that, of course, motherhood is very much, in fact, the end result of sexuality. They're very much related, and I love that they coexist inside your book and inside you. And of course, motherhood is not the end of a sex life. We hope.
No.
Yeah. We're gonna make this the last question. I apologize if we didn't get to anybody's questions. But how do your family and friends feel about your first book being a sexually frank book?
I don't know. I haven't asked them. I'll have to ask them.
You haven't asked them this question yet?
Well, okay. So my dad's read it. My dad read it early on, and he thinks it's great. And he's surprisingly totally comfortable with me talking.
He gave it a perfect 10. Sorry.
He gave it a perfect 10.
I'm sorry.
Oh my God, poor dad.
I know.
Oh, poor dad.
Your dad is such a good sport about this.
He does not care, doesn't care. Does not care. He doesn't care. So my dad is very unusual in that, like, he's not at all freaked out by the fact that I've written a book like this, and he read the whole thing. He's read the whole thing. Like, I didn't redact any parts of it. So the rest of my family is actually super supportive. And I don't think I would have written a book like this, and I don't think I would do the job that I do if my family wasn't just totally weirdly supportive of it. Like, it's I only say weird in that it feels weird that it's not, that there isn't more of a point of conflict around it. And there just really isn't. Like, it really, but I think people can surprise you, really, because I think a lot of people, most people are not comfortable talking about sex, but a lot of people, have their own secret, experience of sex that they may not talk about, but I think they can sort of find plenty to relate to. And, I really think it seems like it's less shocking to people, like, including, elderly relatives, than I might have thought.
I mean, the funny thing is that people have been having sex all along,
It's nothing new. They know all about it.
They know all about it. We keep reinventing it and reselling it, making new products. But
yeah, it's the same old thing. Yeah.
Tracy, thank you for inviting me to do this. Thank you for writing this wonderful book. I hope everybody will buy it, read it, and share it with the people in your life.
Thank you, everyone. And thank you so much for sticking with us through technical difficulties.
Yes, thank you both. I apologize for my odd lighting situation at the moment, but I appreciate you both rolling with the change. Thank you to all of our audience members who also handled the pivot well. If you missed any part of the event, the full recording is available on our Facebook page, which is just going to be www.facebook.com/Strand Bookstore. We'll also put that in an email to all of you. And then, as a final note, if you haven't purchased a copy of Want Me yet, I have dropped a link in the chat. And then on that note, thank you so much, Tracy, and thank you so much, Sarah, for your time this evening. It was a fantastic and fascinating discussion, and I truly appreciate your flexibility in rolling with the platform switch and everything which came with that.
Thank you.
Everyone have a great evening. Bye.